Chapter 1-3. After 3 days of contemplation, Shirou finally came to accept that he had crossed over into the city of Fuki. The city is divided into 2 districts, Miyama and Shinto, and is home to prominent families such as the Tosaka and Matu, as well as the church, particularly the Ryudo Temple and the Fuki Bridge, which are iconic symbols of the city. Despite the initial difficulty in accepting it, Shirou eventually came to realize that he had become one of the main characters in this world, the second-generation hero of justice, known as Shirou Amiya. However, he soon noticed that the timeline of his transmigration seemed to be slightly off. As Shirou stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The child staring back at him was around 6 years old, dressed in a sweater featuring the cartoon character Doraemon. He had a head of reddish-brown hair and eyebrows that seemed to be constantly furrowed. Despite his young age, there was an air of maturity and age to him that was unsettling. September 7, 1993. That's before the Fourth Holy Grail War. Shirou exclaimed, clutching his head in frustration. In addition to the fact that the Fourth Holy Grail War had not yet occurred in Fuki City, there were several other indicators that something was amiss. Most notably, this body, or the little boy who would later be renamed Shirou Amiya, was currently called Fujimaru Shirou, and both of his parents were still alive. This meant that Shirou might experience a series of tragic events during the Fourth Holy Grail War. For example, he might wake up one night to find a killer ghost lurking in his house, or he might get caught up in attacks by ancient heroes while walking home from school. The most critical issue was that Shirou's house was located near the Fuyuki Grand Theater, the site of the final stage of the Fourth Holy Grail War, and the place where the Holy Grail's black mud would descend. The fire caused by the black mud would turn the area into a sea of flames, killing everyone in its path. In the original history, Shirou Amiya was the only survivor of the fire, but now that he had crossed over, he had no way of knowing if he would be able to survive. No, Fuyuki City is too dangerous. It's better to hurry up and convince my parents to move. Shirou thought frantically. He made up his mind to persuade his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Fujimaru, to move out of Fuyuki City. However, his efforts were in vain. Shirou, you're not allowed to be stubborn anymore. Do you know how much effort your dad has put into getting this house? And moving? You're not allowed to say such stubborn words anymore, Mr. Fujimaru scolded him sternly. The economic downturn in 1993, coupled with the real estate bubble and the international financial crisis in 1992, made it difficult for many people to move. Fortunately, Mr. Fujimaru's job was relatively stable, so the possibility of moving was out of the question. Who knows if they would be able to find a job in the next city after quitting and moving? Shirou couldn't directly tell his parents that he was a transmigrator and that a magician's war was about to break out in Fuyuki City, leading to a fire that would kill them all. Even if they believed him, they would probably send him to the church to have the evil spirit exorcised from his body. Shirou had no choice but to accept the situation and hope for the best. Since the most effective way of moving had been vetoed, Shirou began to think about survival strategies for the Fourth Holy Grail War. He formulated the following survival guidelines. Absolutely do not approach famous facilities such as the Pier, Fuyuki Bridge, and International Hotel. Absolutely do not contact anyone related to the Holy Grail War. Go home after school. Don't go out after dark, and close the door when entering and exiting the house. Walk on the main road and never walk down the alley. By following these guidelines, Shirou hoped to minimize the chances of encountering dangerous situations during the Holy Grail War. It would not be easy, but he was determined to do whatever it took to survive. Article 19. Absolutely do not stick your nose into other people's business. Prioritize your own survival above all else. Article 20. Pay attention to the movements of the Grand Theater, and if anything unusual happens, quickly gather people and run away. Having written down these 20 survival guidelines, Shirou carefully read through them and couldn't help but praise their effectiveness. As long as he could survive and wait until he grew up, he could move to another city and use his knowledge of the future to create a better life for himself. Even if he couldn't become the world's richest person like the protagonists in urban web novels, at least he could make his life in this world richer than his previous one. He wouldn't have to rely on being punctual to get by like he did in his previous life as a third-rate web novelist. Just as Shirou was feeling proud of his plans and looking forward to his bright future, the arrival of one person caused his plans to come crashing down. On September 15, 1993, at 5:32 p.m., Mrs. Fujimaru returned home from grocery shopping, carrying a basket full of vegetables and meat, as well as a small girl covered in dust who was slightly smaller than Shirou. As soon as they entered the house and before Mrs. Fujimaru could even put down the basket of groceries, she confidently announced, "Shirou, this is Sakura. She will be your sister from now on." The little girl, dressed in a red dress, had short black hair and bright green eyes akin to emeralds. She nervously introduced herself. Hello, big brother." Shirou had a blank expression on his face. Although she looked a little different from the girl in his memories, if he changed the color of her hair and eyes to purple, there was no denying that she bore a striking resemblance to the girl he knew as either Matu Sakura or Tosaka Sakura. But shouldn't Sakura have been outside his social circle at this point in time? How did she end up getting brought home by his own mother so suddenly? "Shirou, I'm telling you, Sakura will be your sister from now on, and you are not allowed to bully her." "Got it," Mrs. Fujimaru said sternly. "Got it," Shirou nodded in response. It was clear that Mrs. Fujimaru wanted to adopt Sakura, but unfortunately, the family's decision was not up to her alone. Especially in this era of economic crisis, would Mr. Fujimaru, as the head of the household, accept the burden of an additional family member? What? Sakura was abandoned by her parents? And you found her in a garbage dump? How could any parent do that to their own child? No matter what the reason, It's unforgivable to abandon your own flesh and blood. All right, I agree. From now on, I'll treat Sakura as if she were my own daughter, Mr. Fujimaru exclaimed, his indignation palpable. His decision to adopt Sakura caused Shirou's mouth to twitch slightly. However, having accepted the memories of this body, Shirou also knew why Mr. and Mrs. Fujimaru was so kind-hearted. This may have been related to their own experiences as abandoned infants in the post-war era of the 1960s. They had been like dependent siblings before eventually getting married and having Shirou on April 15, 1987. Upon realizing that both of his parents had come to accept Sakura as their daughter, Shirou became overwhelmed with emotion. He tore up his plan sheet in frustration and tossed it into the trash. Big brother, wake up, a soft voice called to him, and he felt a pair of small hands gently pushing him. Shirou muttered in his sleep, turned over, and instinctively reached out. There was now a warm and soft presence in his arms, reminding him of the pillows in his bed before he crossed over. But this presence felt a bit strange, and it was also warm and soft, with a faint voice in his ear. Brother? Gently, Shirou opened his eyes and saw a shy face. His confused spirit instantly woke up, and he sat up straight. Sakura. I'm sorry, I squeezed you again, Shirou apologized with a guilty expression. It's okay. Sakura sat up again, shaking her head and speaking softly. Shirou scratched his head, a little embarrassed. He used to have a habit of sleeping with pillows and always liked to hug something, so he just acted instinctively. Actually, this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Shirou's house had 2 floors, with the first floor comprising the entrance and living room, while the second floor consisted of 3 rooms. One for Mr. and Mrs. Fujimaru, one for Shirou, and the last one was a storage room. As Mr. and Mrs. Fujimaru had welcomed Sakura into their home, but her room had yet to be tidied up, she had been staying with Shirou and sleeping in his room. Fortunately, Shirou was still a kid, otherwise his parents, who had just taken in a daughter, would have likely chased him out of his room and insisted he slept in the living room. After all, it was deemed inappropriate for males and females to sleep near each other. The problem was that Shirou's physique was still that of a child, yet his mind was that of a normal teenager in puberty. Fortunately, his physical maturation was not yet complete, and his hormones were not yet in full swing. Nonetheless, these days, Shirou still subconsciously regarded Sakura as a pillow in his dreams. Brother, don't sleep. Aunt Chiyo called us for dinner. Sakura climbed off the bed and said to Shirou with a serious face. Shirou's biological mother's name is Chiyo, Fujimaru Chiyo to be exact, and his biological father is named Fujimaru Narita. Both of them were abandoned children from the 1960s who, in an act of retribution against their respective parents, renounced their inherited surnames and created a new one. It is rumored that they first met in an area abundant with gourd vines, which inspired them to adopt the surname Fujimaru. Sakura had been with the Fujimaru family for 3 days, and by all accounts, she should be addressing Fujimaru Chiyo as mother. However, she was still unable to muster the courage to say it, instead addressing her as aunt and Fujimaru Narita as uncle. As the Fujimaru couple had experienced abandonment themselves, they could empathize with Sakura's emotions and chose not to impose the change of address upon her. In fact, their treatment towards Sakura was even more amiable than their attitude towards Shirou. This is simply ridiculous. Sakura and Shirou went downstairs and arrived in the living room, where his mother, Fujimaru Chiyo, had already made breakfast with sandwiches and milk. At this time, people did not have the concept of nutrition and health, and breakfast and dinner were casually made as long as there was no risk of food poisoning. More practically, all 3 meals were instant noodles, which were economical and saved time, especially for those who had already joined the ranks of the unemployed. Fortunately, Mr. Fujimaru Narita, the mainstay of the Fujimaru family's economy, worked very hard because of his experience as an abandoned child and was highly valued by his boss, so the Fujimaru family's economic source was relatively stable. Mr. Fujimaru had already gone to work early, so at the moment, only Shirou, Sakura, and Mrs. Fujimaru Chiyo were eating at the dining table. At the dining table, Mrs. Fujimaru was as warm as ever towards Sakura, asking her questions and making her feel a little awkward with her enthusiasm. Shirou, hurry up and eat. Don't be late for school, or I'll have to beat your butt open, Mrs. Fujimaru threatened sternly. Shirou was speechless. This is a typical example of a mother who has a daughter and forgets about her son. Okay, Shirou replied weakly, dragging his voice out. Getting through compulsory education in the previous life was not easy, but now, with a new account, it's time to go back to school again. Fortunately, the difficulty of the course in Japan is not as scary as in China, and the physical education teacher does not get sick frequently. Unfortunately, Japanese primary school students inherited the excellent tradition of being Chinibu and have no interest in communication at all. Recently, the rerun of Dragon Ball Z on the TV station has rekindled the Chinibu spirit of these primary school students, and it is embarrassing to see them playing the poses of combining in broad daylight. Sakura, Aunt Chio will take Shirou to school first. You stay at home and don't wander around. Fujiwara Chio took Shirou to the door and entrusted Sakura, who was at home. Okay, Aunt Chio, Sakura nodded. What a reassuring, well-behaved child. Unlike some big brats who still need their mothers to take them to school. Shirou expressionlessly. Actually, you don't have to send me. Shut up, no talking back to me. Fujiwara Chio patted Shirou's head and then showed a smile to Sakura before closing the door. Recently, there have been several student disappearances in Fuki City, a total of 7. This is enough to alarm any mother, and Shirou, who is well known for his involvement in the Holy Grail War, knows that these disappearances are the work of serial killer Ryunosuke, who has come to Fuki City and is treating it as his hunting ground. Mrs. Fujiwara, indignant, asks Shirou what kind of scum Sakura's parents are to abandon such a well-behaved little girl. Mrs. Fujiwara has grown to really like Sakura, who is well-behaved, sensible, cute, and obedient, and almost fulfills all of Mrs. Fujiwara's idealized expectations of a daughter. However, Shirou has no expression on his face, probably because Mrs. Fujiwara is projecting her own experience of being abandoned in her youth onto the situation. Shirou doesn't believe for a second that Sakura was abandoned by the Tosaka family. Sakura's black hair and green eyes, although sometimes sad, still retain the purity and liveliness of a child. This means that Sakura has not yet been passed on by the Tosaka family to the Matu family, and has not undergone modification by the worm. Sakura has been cautious about the outside world since coming to the Fujiwara household, but also shows a strong desire to go outside, leading Shirou to believe that she has run away from home and is experiencing conflicting feelings about wanting to return. The Fujiwara family, however, does not know this background information and believes that Sakura's behavior is due to being abandoned by her parents and longing for them, probably because they are projecting their own experiences onto the situation. Accepting a runaway like Sakura is not a big problem, but the problem is what will happen when the Tosaka and Matu families come looking for her. Both families are Magus families, with one led by an old pervert who has been alive for hundreds of years, while the Fujiwara family is just a normal family. Even Shirou, who will eventually awaken and become an ally of justice, is currently just an ordinary brat who has not yet awakened, and it is certain that they will not be able to block the Magus families from finding Sakura. Forget it, we can think about that later. After all, we're just kindly accepting Sakura into our home. It's not like they would kill us all, right? Shirou thought, pushing these worries to the back of his mind. It's gradually time for school. Fuki City is a small coastal city with 2 districts. The old district, Mayama Town in the mountains, and the newly constructed district of Shinto, which experienced rapid economic development. As the city is small, there are only 2 primary schools, Hakagata in Mayama Town and Tsukumagami in Shinto. Shirou attends Tsukumagami Primary School because his house is in Shinto. At this moment, many students are saying goodbye to their parents at the school gate, including Mrs. Fujiwara, who takes Shirou to the gate and says seriously, "Don't wander off after school. Wait for me to pick you up, understand?" There are regular parents sending their children to school, as well as some who are worried because of the recent cases of missing children. I know. Shirou nods, understanding the stakes of Ryunosuke hunting children. He is a time traveler who knows about the future, and his wish is to become a wealthy and powerful individual, so he would not allow himself to fall here. As he walks towards the campus, children in groups of 3 to 5 share their happiness on the way. Shirou does not encounter anyone he knows, and walks towards the school building with his backpack. Suddenly, he feels like someone is spying on him, but when he looks around, he doesn't see anyone looking at him. An illusion, he wonders. Could it be that he is too nervous about the upcoming Fourth Holy Grail War, causing this illusion? Scratching his face, Shirou ultimately can only come to this conclusion. Shirou is just an ordinary primary school student now, without the awakening of origins, and not a participant in the Holy Grail War, who would need to spy on him, and for what reason? Thinking this, Shirou walks into the teaching building with peace of mind. However, he does not know that on a tower overlooking the entire primary school, a young man in golden armor has a slightly interested smile on his face. An interesting soul, the man thinks. Shirou's soul is more complex and nauseating than that of adults, like a mottled fire burning with cow dung, garbage, plastic, weeds, and waste. However, in this nauseating mottled fire that exudes a bad smell, there is also a small fire that exudes a fragrant new fire. The Golden King is sensitive and has noticed this small fire, and wonders whether to let the nauseating fire of evil swallow it up, Let it become a complete mixed breed, or let the new fire ignite and break away from ignorance. The Golden King gradually fades away and finally disappears without a trace. The final math class ends and it's time for lunch. Tsukumagami Primary School does not have a cafeteria, so students must bring bento boxes or buy food at the small shop. Mrs. Fujimaru made a bento for Shirou, but also included a cup of kelp tea, which Shirou dislikes. He shakes his head and goes to the school gate grocery store to buy a soft drink instead. As Shirou burps and heads towards school, he can't shake the feeling that he is being watched. The icy malice emanating from his unseen observer only adds to his unease. Suddenly, a shadow darts across his field of vision and a loud bang echoes through the air. When Shirou comes to, he finds himself facing a stranger, unsure of where he is or how he got there. A distant voice is crying out, but he can't seem to focus on it, his head still foggy from whatever happened. The man's chaotic words suddenly stir Shirou's spirit, and he struggles to move his body and bites his tongue, causing intense pain that wakes him up. He is in a room with closed doors and windows, and the man has a girl tied up with a thick rope crying. There is a bloody smell emanating from the damp ground and an unknown liquid flowing from a nearby adult corpse, telling a more terrifying story. The bloody scene stimulates the brain, causing Shirou to breathe slightly hurriedly and his head to become chaotic. Calm down. Calm down. Shirou tries to calm down, but the bloody scene stimulates his brain, causing adrenaline to constantly secrete and his head to heat up. He sees a man with orange short hair and a refreshing face, but he is using blood to draw an unknown magic circle on the ground. Shirou realizes that this is Yuryu Ryunosuke, the serial killer. His eyes lock onto Ryunosuke as the madman picks up the girl, who is bound and crying, next to him. Your tears are so lovely, Ryunosuke says, his smile growing wider as he relishes in the girl's cries of despair. Shirou's survival plan was crushed by Sakura, and then he was caught by Ryunosuke. He feels so unlucky. He then noticed the brown-haired girl with short hair was wearing a uniform from Hakagata Elementary School. Not a good sign. Oh, my little angel, you're awake too, Ryunosuke exclaimed as he grabbed the girl and threw her into the center of the magic circle. He then turned to Shirou and laughed maniacally, throwing him into the circle as well. With this, the sacrifice to the demon will be enough, Ryunosuke said, his face contorting into a twisted smile. Overflow, overflow. Did I just say this a moment ago? Oh, never mind. He began to recite the incantation, and cold sweat ran down Shirou's forehead. It was clear that Ryunosuke intended to play the game of summoning a demon and killing them both. He was a scumbag who took pleasure in killing, and he had even killed his own beloved sister in the past. He had found an ancient book that seemed to be a magic book at his home, and he had been following the summoning ritual in the book, collecting sacrifices and killing people to summon a demon. Although this had inadvertently triggered the summoning mechanism for the Holy Grail War and summoned a servant, he had participated in the war not because he wanted to, but because this kind of cult-like killing pattern brought him new joy in killing. If Ryunosuke, who had finished the incantation, was unable to summon a demon, he would personally kill Shirou and the girl. What to do? Shirou's fear of death was palpable as he sat, bound and helpless, in the dark room. As an ordinary elementary school student, he knew that he had nothing to offer in this dire situation, save for his knowledge of the Type Moon world and a sense of business acumen. Sweat dripped down his forehead as he frantically tried to think of a way out, but all he could do was wait and hope that someone, the Jade Emperor, the Three Pure Ones, God, Jesus, or even the mysterious being who had sent him through time, would come to his rescue. These purely mental beings were unreliable. The most reliable ones might be the police. But then, when he looked at the girl by his side, his heart grew cold. He realized that the police might be his only hope for survival. With Hakagata Elementary School being over 10 miles away from Tsukumagami Elementary School, the perpetrator, Ryunosuke had committed crimes in 2 different locations, which would only further delay the police's response. Shirou couldn't shake the feeling that by the time the authorities arrived, it would be too late, and all they would find would be the bodies of 2 innocent children. Nobody is reliable. The only thing left is self-rescue. But how can we go about self-rescuing? No system, no awakening, no magic, no superpowers. He was just an ordinary elementary school student, with his hands and feet tied up with thick ropes. How was he going to self-rescue? As Ryunosuke recited the incantation and slowly walked over with a knife in hand, Shirou panicked. He didn't want to die. I don't want to die. As he lay trapped within the magic circle, Shirou barely registers the faint flickering light that dances around its perimeter. His fear of death and delirious fever leave him unable to focus on anything other than his own terror. Meanwhile, a warmth begins to spread through his right hand, accompanied by the appearance of a bright red mark. If he were in a more lucid state, he might have realized that something strange was happening to him.